My name is Ron Carrico, and I am with the San Diego Air and Space Museum. Today is April the 10th, 2017, and we're with Al Degen. Al Degen, spelled D-E-G-E-N, and we're at his home in Palma Valley, California. And he's going to tell us his military aviation history. So,
well,
let me ask a question. Let me start. First of all, where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, in a suburb of Chicago.
Which one?
Well, not actually a suburb. It was. I'm trying to think right now of the area. Oh, well, it was Rogers Park.
Rogers Park.
And it was just right a part of Chicago. I mean, it was not a suburb. It was a part of Chicago, and that's where I was born in 1923, September 1. My memory is only so good at this point. Now, I wanted to say the reason that I joined the Naval Air Corps was that I had a friend named Walker Wincoop, and that was Skip Wincoop was a guy that loved flying, and he loved the water, and he loved everything about the Navy. So he got excited about the war, and this 1942, and he wanted to be a naval aviator. So he talked two friends of his, Al Degen and Dean Clark, into going down to the Naval Air Corps enlistment station and volunteering to go into the Naval Air Corps.
Okay, so your pilot training class was, when did you start?
I started in 1943, but the point, the thing I wanted to get across was that Skip Wincoop talked the two of us, Dean Clark and Al Degen, into going down and joining the Navy Air Corps. And when we got there, he got so excited about getting into the Air Corps that his heart went berserk.
Oh no!
I mean, it beat too many times, and he kept going back and retesting while we were there, and they just wouldn't qualify him. So both Dean Clark and I were accepted because we didn't care. We were just down there with him.
Yeah.
I mean, neither of us had a big love affair going with the Navy or anything, or the Air Corps, but we went along, and so we were accepted and became
So where did you go to pilot training?
Well, I started into the cadet program, and we started in Indiana, at Greencastle, Indiana, which was the DePaul University.
So which airplane did you fly first?
Well, I didn't fly then. They started out with the program. One of the problems that I had going into the Navy was that they took in a whole bunch of people, and then they discovered that their attrition rate was not what they thought it would be, so they started to slow the program down. So we started in Greencastle, Indiana at DePaul University, and spent 90 days there just doing classwork and doing physical training and so forth.
So you flew probably 3 different airplanes in pilot training?
I flew 3 different, well, I started with the Piper Cub, actually.
Okay, and then what?
Yeah.
And then to the N2S Stearman.
Stearman, yeah.
Oh, well, that was a fun airplane to fly.
Yeah, well, it was interesting, and I got a picture here of someplace.
Right there.
Right here. So I flew the Stearman, then it went to the Vultee Vibrator, the SNV, or you've never heard of that plane?
No, of course I
Sure.
Have you really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I didn't think, and then the SNJ.
Well, so they had, oh yeah, okay, so the SNJ, so...
Yeah.
So I flew
T6.
I flew four different planes.
Okay, great. And so when did you graduate?
Graduated in July of 1944.
Oh, July 44. Okay, so then your next airplane was to the Dauntless.
SBD Douglas Dauntless.
Where did you train?
And I trained in Florida, in Pensacola.
Okay, how long was that training?
Well, I can't tell you exactly because I wasn't specific in timing, but we trained for, well, I guess it would be 4 or 5 months in the SBD.
Okay, so now let me back up. Your friend that you actually got into the Navy with, did he make it as a pilot?
He made it as a pilot, but he went to twin engine.
Okay.
I went single engine, he went twin engine.
Okay.
And
so what did he end up flying?
he ended up, what did he end up flying?
Yeah.
He ended up flying the twin engine. I'm trying to think what the plane was.
There's not that many. There's for the
C-45, was it a Beach?
No.
Was it a Beach?
Beechcraft.
Yeah, it was a Beechcraft.
Beechcraft.
Probably a C-45, perhaps, twin engine transport.
Yeah, I kind of lost touch with him because he went a separate route in the training than I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I flew I checked out. I had a twin engine checkout in Beach, the Bamboo bomber.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was
the A-11, wasn't it?
C-45. I think it was.
Yeah, C-45. But it was before the C-45 went with the metal frame. The previous one, I think it was the A-11 or A-12.
I don't know if it was metal or not.
Yeah.
All I know is they.
Yeah.
All I know is that when you pull on the runway, if you didn't get it just right, the guy said as soon as you get it pointed straight, you power to both of them. And he said, but on the other hand, my last student said, yeah, I did that, and all I did was go off the runway faster.
Well, I can remember flying the no, it wasn't the SNV. It was a twin engine, the B-26 converted to the Navy,
Oh, cool.
and they clipped 5 feet off the wings or something, supposedly, so that when we took off in the plane, and I was co-pilot, I didn't get to be qualified to be a primary pilot, but if you didn't hold the throttles and the pitch absolutely in full bore to take off, you didn't make it. If anything failed on the way from leaving the ground, you lost it.
Okay, so let's talk about the SBD. Since we have one in the museum, you know where you got that one, right?
No, I don't.
It came out of Lake Michigan.
And then,
I think we told you that.
and I qualified on Lake Michigan.
Really?
It might have been, well, it wasn't an old plane of mine because I didn't lose one, but.
Well, they had the Wolverine and the Sable were the two different carriers there.
And I think I was on the Wolverine.
Well, tell me about that. What was it like? Did you actually stay on it?
Did not stay on it. Just took off from Glenview and flew into the area and made a couple landings and took off again.
You take off a full stop landing or arrested landing?
Arrested landing on the cables.
A solo or with an instructor? Or?
Solo.
Really? Wow. So where was it in relationship to Chicago?
Well, I can't honestly tell you that, but it wasn't that far away, I don't think. I mean, I can't, my memory is not good enough to go back and...
Well, Lake Michigan is pretty darn big.
That's big.
Yes, but it was generally north of Chicago.
Okay. So you took off out of Glenview, then you fly up and they say there's over 130 airplanes still there.
I can believe it because we would. Well, the first thing that we learned about it was that the planes that we were flying in, and the one particular one that I had at least, had been stripped of all the protection, the metal plates and so forth that protected the pilot.
Sure,
the armament.
And so the plane was, with the engine that it had in it, the inches of mercury that we would have on it would be much less than when we were flying them, because they probably weighed, 400 or 500 pounds less. And so we had a big problem of overspeeding, coming in too hot.
What kind of approach speed would you have? Do you remember that?
What kind of what?
Approach speed would you have?
Gosh, I can't remember specifically. The tendency was to come in hot.
Right.
And we wanted to come in at a slightly increased angle and slowed down for the carrier landings.
Now the SBD has dive flaps on it.
Yes, it did.
Are there different flaps than the dive flaps for landing purposes?
Absolutely.
Okay, I've never really noticed that.
I haven't either. I haven't either.
I can tell you that one time when I was out in the Pacific in Hawaii, that I was flying an SBD, SB2C.
Oh boy, you flew that one too, huh?
SB2C, and I was doing a test, some kind of a test on it, that it had been damaged or something, and they repaired it, and I was flying. And a Army pilot made a run at us, you know, a mock run. So I said, we'll fix that guy. So I pulled the plane up and blew on the dive brakes to slow the plane down, let him fly by, and then I would drop. I was going to close the dive brakes and pick up his tail and give him a little hoota. And so, but the problem was when I put the dive brakes on, it slowed the plane down so much I went into a spin.
Wow. Wow.
And well, then I gave it the normal spin recovery, snapped the, you know,
Rudder.
direction and full stick forward and full throttle. Well, no, not the first time, and then the second. But anyway, the plane wasn't coming out of the spin because the dive brakes were open, and it wouldn't pick up enough speed to recover.
Right.
And so I finally realized it and closed the dive brakes and came out probably 500 feet above the ground, going rather quickly. And I said to my gunner in the back, that was a little close. And he said, he said, well, I was out of the plane ready to bail out.
I can imagine, yeah.
So, okay, now, so where did you train to fly? Oh, you trained to fly the SBD in Pensacola.
Yes.
And the thing I always wondered about that, actually I got up at the one in the museum, it used to be on the floor. And I got up and I looked in it, and it's got that telescope, okay? Well, actually it turns out it's a 3-power telescope, I find that out. Did you have that in there?
Not that I remember.
They got rid of that, I think.
I don't recall seeing it.
But you had a gun sight of some sort or another, correct?
Yes, we had just a basic gun sight.
Okay, now, so let's.
But we didn't, you know, we didn't plan to machine gun anybody with. This plane was too slow to.
There's 230 calibers on the front of it.
Yeah, and 30 calibers in the back.
Right. You know how many missions you flew?
Well, I didn't actually.
Combat missions.
Huh?
Combat missions.
How, what?
How many combat missions?
Oh, I didn't fly any. I never got into combat.
Oh no. Well, good, I guess.
Well, I just didn't make it. I got in Air Group 2, it was joined Air Group 2, and then they discovered they had too many pilots, and they transferred us, and I went to a utility squadron.
Okay, well let's back up a second here. Let's try keep it chronological. So you graduated from pilot training in July '44.
Yes.
The war ends in basically 1 year later. So then when you trained in the SBD, you must have graduated somewhere around the first of the year? Or finished your training SBD somewhere?
Yeah, that's about right.
And where did you go?
Then I joined Air Group 2, and you know.
Were they was that a carrier then, or?
It was an Air Group. They weren't assigned to a carrier yet.
Okay, so where did you join the group?
I joined them as I remember, in Pensacola, Tokyo Bay, when they signed the armistice.
Wow. So you didn't fly at Okinawa or any of those kind of missions? No,
I didn't get into combat.
Okay, well, the whole SBD flight thing is interesting to me. And the reason why is because of the tactics. I mean, you obviously were familiar with the tactics.
Yes.
When you're going to bomb a ship, and I'm sure you must have dropped bombs on something out.
Yes, we did. We practiced.
So when you're flying in, let's say, what would you say, 5,000 to 6,000 feet above sea level?
Yes, at least.
And then when you roll in, you start your dive at what, about 100 knots or so?
Oh, more than 100 knots.
Okay.
Probably.
I mean, just starting.
Well, you would just be flying along at normal 120 knots, I'd say.
Go. Okay. Now, how did you start the dive?
Well, we just pushed over
You
and
pushed over. Okay.
and just
How did you know where to push over?
we just flew along, and there'd be targets on the ground
Right.
that we would bomb, and we'd just push over and aim. And of course, you were going down like this, and you would be going, even though we felt like we were going 180 degrees down, the lift would be carrying us on a slight angle, so maybe we're diving at like 50 to 60 degrees.
Okay.
And of course, we were supposed to pull out at about 1,500 feet. But sometimes we would just stay right on the target, sometimes a little longer, and end up at 500 feet or something and come out fairly close.
End up pulling out at 5 Gs or so?
Yeah, well, I'd say 5 to 6 Gs.
Yeah, okay. Did you ever forget to put the dive flaps out?
I don't think so, but I can't remember that.
Well, I've talked to 2 different SBD pilots. Jerry Coleman, who was the radio announcer for the Padres for 40 years.
Okay.
Did you know
I didn't know him.
Did you know he flew SBDs?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, how about that? Now, he flew SBDs, and he got over there he was a Marine pilot, and he ended up flying off of a place called Green Island. That's where he did most of his flying, and he came back, and he was getting checked out in the SB2C, and the war ended, and he was out of there,
Well, that's I was out of there after the war was over, bang, quick. But we were flying SBDs, and we were in Pasco, Washington, as I remember, and they just brought in a bunch of SB2Cs, and there was no training or anything else. You just got into the SB2C and flew it. I mean, well, it wasn't that much different, but it was not near as reliable as the SBD was.
Yeah. What was the nickname?
The nickname of the SB2C? The Helldiver.
No, son of a bitch, second class.
Oh, well, I don't remember that, but
that's good. I heard that before.
Yeah, people hated it.
Son of a bitch, second class.
Yeah. Well, it was not a very reliable. It was heavier, and it wasn't as reliable a plane as the SBD was.
Well, they flew the SBD a long time, and I mean, heck, it won the Battle of Midway. When it really comes down to it. And Jerry said it was very, very stable.
A very good plane.
Yeah, very good plane. But what I was always curious about is, I mean, when I flew fighters, there was a couple of different ways to enter your dive. One was just to kind of slowly go in this way or pull the nose up. I guess you could do that.
Well, I think, in actuality, we would go like this and go down like that. I mean, make a slight turn and go down, because we just didn't go like this.
Yeah, you don't want to.
Not an English one.
No.
No, we'd be flying along and then go into a dive like that.
And then usually just following a guy in front of you, sort of thing?
You'd fly on his wing, yes. You didn't want to get in a slipstream if you...
Were you flying flights of 4 usually? 4-plane formation?
Yes.
So after training, so you probably didn't end up with an awful lot of time in the SBD when it came down to it.
Probably. Well, my total time in was about 1,000 hours.
Oh, that's a lot.
That's not very much.
Well.
Well, no, pardon me. My total time from the beginning of my flying until I left the Air Corps was about 1,000 hours,
yeah.
including F4Us, because I went back after the war in 1949, I would say, 48, 49, someplace in there, and joined the Navy Air Corps squadron in New Orleans, and to become a member of the thing, because we could get better booze. The price was right on booze, price was right on cigarettes, and we filled a certain desire, I guess, to fly a little more. And
okay, so let's go back. So We talk about the SBD. Well, you always had. Did you always have the same? We always crewed with the same guy, the same gunner in back.
I had the same gunner.
What was his name?
Pat. It's in my book there. Pat Carroll.
Where was he from?
Pat Carroll was from New York.
Did you ever see him again?
No.
That was it, huh?
That was it.
That was it.
Yeah,
I figure he probably had enough of me, and the times we got in so many close calls. And,
to close calls. Tell me about a close call.
Well,
besides the spin when you were attacked by the Army pilot.
Oh yeah, but that spin and then I got into another time. One time when I got into another spin, and almost didn't get out in time, but had enough experience to recover from those situations.
He's pushing on the rudder pedal, by the way.
Yeah. Get the stick forward and opposite rudder.
I've talked to an awful lot of Navy pilots, and one of the guys, Diz Laird, who lives over in Coronado, he was a Hellcat pilot.
Okay, I flew those.
Really? Well, anyway, he was talking about air combat, and he was in a dogfight with a Japanese Tony.
Oh boy!
And so he rolls in this way, and the Tony, and they kept going up and down and up and down, and then pretty soon he was talking, he was doing this, and I said, "What are you doing with your foot?" He said, "Oh, whatever the gun's jammed up above the rudder pedal was a solenoid. You had to punch the solenoid," and so he was just reliving it.
Right then.
Well, let's talk now. So how in the world did you end up in Japan for the armistice? Or not? They didn't even call it the armistice, did
Well, because our carrier group went there.
Which carrier were you on?
Well, at that time, and I was trying to think back, and it was the Munda Bay, which was a little carrier.
A little carrier.
Yeah, I landed on those for a couple times, and made 2 night landings on the Saratoga in Hawaii, and that was about as thrilling as anything I've ever done. Have you ever made a night landing on a carrier?
I purposely avoided the Navy. Just for that reason, by the way.
Well, it is beyond scary, because actually we were catapulted off, and the night was so dark that you couldn't see anything. So we would, as soon as we were airborne, we would start a slight gradual turn to the left, to the port, and come around and at altitude, and there was no way to identify the carrier where it was, and they would give us a signal on the radio to start our turn to come into the carrier, and as we got downstream from the carrier, we could pick up the wake because of the phosphorescence.
Right.
And then come in, and then of course picked up the LSO, who was lit up with his suit. And that's an experience I just don't want to ever go through again. We made 2 night carrier landings. One guy made 2 and crashed both times, but walked away, and he was qualified, they said.
Yeah, they needed it.
Yeah.
Well, it was exciting, to say the least.
So the surrender was signed on September 2, 1945?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Approximately.
And where were you?
I was in the Tokyo Bay for the signing of the armistice.
What was going on overhead?
I don't remember exactly. I mean, it was nothing was going on overhead.
Well, the reason why is I've seen pictures, and I've read that the Army Air Corps and the Navy flew 400 airplanes overhead, just to kind of make the point to the Japanese. Well, we're really serious about this.
I would never say no, because I can't remember.
So then you sailed home, I guess.
I sailed home and became a salesperson for Lord Baltimore Press and
oh no! Wait, let's talk about sailing home. So, you must have left within did you go ashore at all in Japan when the war?
Yeah. Oh yes, I went ashore for at least 3 or 4 times, and we carried a sidearm when we went ashore because there were rumors, and I don't know whether it actually was true or not, but that the Japanese, if you wore your wings, and it said don't wear your wings.
Really?
So we took our wings off, and they said that they imagined that these were the same pilots that were bombing them and killing their people, and so they grabbed supposedly grabbed 1 or 2 aviators or guys that were accompanying aviators and strung them up in the back alleys.
Really? I never heard that.
Well, it's one of those rumors that we don't know is true or not, but we believed it enough to not wear our wings and to carry sidearms with us.
Right.
And we would escort usually 10 or 15 or 20 enlisted men.
What was it like ashore? Was it pretty well bombed out, wasn't it?
You would walk, I remember distinctly walking up to one building which looked just fine. I mean, it was brick and mortar, and then you went inside it and it was just a hollow shell. It had been bombed out completely.
And did the people stick around you, or did they vanish quickly?
The kids followed us.
Right.
And we would have 10 to 20 kids wanting whatever food we had, because we'd carry our own food and dispense little bits of food, candy to the kids and so forth. And they liked it. And the people probably were scared to death of us, but...
Yeah, well, so you would have been an ensign at that point?
I was an ensign, yeah. I made Lieutenant J.G. later.
Yeah, I had to ask people, where were you when the war ended? Where were you when the war?
Well, I was in Tokyo Bay, and we were just one of many, many, many ships, and we knew that they were signing the armistice on a big ship that was nearby, but we didn't know specifically what was going on.
And as far as when the atomic bomb was set off, where were you when that happened?
Now, that I was in transit. I mean, I was on the ocean on a carrier, a CVE, and we just heard about the bomb. I mean, I didn't know anything specifically about it, other than the fact that it was a game changer.
Yeah, and then you probably knew about the second one a couple days later.
And we flew over them.
You flew over?
But I think that the bombs, I mean, there's a lot of argument about whether the bomb should have been dropped or not, and I'm all for it because it saved, 1 million Americans and 1 million or 2 million Japanese.
More than likely, yeah. More than likely.
I mean, it would have been they were prepared to fight to the last man.
So they did everywhere else.
And
woman and kid.
When I was on shore in Tokyo, I went into a tea room and met a young Japanese guy who was 19 at the time, as I remember, and he was a member of a kamikaze squadron. And I said, well, how come you volunteered for that, or something to that effect? Because he spoke some English, and we kind of understood each other through words and through motions and so forth. And he said, we didn't volunteer. The squadron commander volunteered the whole squadron to become kamikazes. And that was it. And he got out of it alive, obviously, and was happy to do it.
How did you meet him?
We went into a tea room, and I don't remember the specifics, but I saw him sitting there, I guess, and I went up to him and said something, and it developed that he was a pilot. And I was amazed at his hours, because he had like 300 hours. And you know, we kind of hear where they got 42 hours or something.
Right.
And he had experience, and he survived, and it was quite amazing to me.
Yeah.
And so anyway, and then I went back and got a bunch of little trophies from, or not trophies, but gifts from various Japanese people, and I lost most of them on the carrier. They were stolen from me.
Yeah.
As
How long did it take you to get home? Did you come home straight from to California, or to go to Hawaii, or?
We came home and ended up in California, and then flew back to Chicago.
Took your airplane, your SBD?
No, I mean, we didn't take that. We were given transportation of some kind.
Right.
And that part of my return trip is all vague to me.
Well, probably you're so happy to get the heck out.
That's all we wanted to do was get back home and get released.
When were you actually out? When were you released?
In September. Well, actually, I went to Northwestern University, got back in Northwestern University, and joined the fall semester.
Oh, really?
And of 1945.
I thought there was a whole deal where you had to, depending on the number of points and so forth and so on.
Well, we got out right away because we were qualified. In other words, if you were a lowly ranked ensign, you got out quicker than somebody that had experience.
Oh, I see.
And we got out real quick.
So you went to Northwestern?
I went to Northwestern.
And when did you graduate?
And graduated in 1948. And
then, is that when you joined the Naval Reserve is what you joined?
And then I went, and then I went to a 3-month, I went with Life magazine to their temporary programs, which they had you soliciting retail people to allow you to put signs in the window, advertised in Life, so forth. And we were promoting that. And I did that for like 6 months, and then went down to, got a job for the New Orleans Item. I was a salesperson for the New Orleans Item, and then now the main paper was the Times-Picayune down there, and the Item was bought by a guy who was a former Navy pilot once, and he hired me to be a salesperson down there, and then when I was going around, I discovered that the Navy reserves were looking for people, and so I went in to join the reserves, and the guy said, well, you can fly, what we've got is 2 planes, you can be the TBM or the F4U, and I said, I don't think.
Oh, boy.
And I said, well, I'm not strong enough to fly the TBM.
Oh my!
You got to horse that goddamn plane around, and so I transitioned into F4Us.
So what was that like?
I loved the F4U. That was the greatest plane I ever flew. It stuck to the deck, which is what I liked. We had come out of the SB2C, which had shock absorbers that when you hit the deck, it just it wanted to take off again, and the F4U just squatted down and was, and there was no transition. I mean, I hadn't flown for a couple years, and then they gave me a couple hours in the SNJ, and then into the F4U, and you're off.
It came right back to you.
Well, it had to, or else you're dead.
Well, I mean, you get twice as much horsepower, and at least.
It was just a great plane. Well, the one thing, it had a needle nose, it had a long nose, and for a short guy like me, you have a tendency to stand on the left rudder as you're coming around in the groove, and so you would skid in the groove, and always got in trouble with that. You had to try to stay off the left rudder.
Well, how did you? So you did make Harrier landings in
So
there.
I did. I joined and got into the F4U, and our squadron was training, and we did various.
What was the training? What kind of training for air to ground or air to air or
just air to air and shooting a few targets and
the flag or the dart or something like that?
Yeah, and I do remember one time, because these few things stick in your mind. I was flying in a diamond formation. Guy up on top, 2 wingmen, and a tail guy. And I'm in the tail situation. And I'm flying along, and what you're doing is just positioning yourself between the 2 planes and not paying as much attention to what's going on around you, because you're just depending on your fellow mates. And I looked up my head, and there is a pier. We're flying down the shoreline, and there is a pier right at eye level. I mean, I'm going to take out the pier in another fraction of a second. And I just pulled it right up through the thing and gave the leader the hell, because I said, you were trying to kill me, but you weren't successful.
Well, so now in those days, so you were flying with the reserves, but you must have had another job.
Well, yes, I was working for the New Orleans Item as a salesperson and selling advertising.
Okay.
And
so how much did you fly then? Once a month or twice a month?
We flew every other weekend, basically, as I recall. And I flew the FG, and
the FG, what's that? What's the FG?
Well, that's F4U.
Oh, okay.
The F4U was made by Vought Chance,
right.
And the G was Goodyear, I think. It was the same plane, just manufactured by a different.
Right. Yeah.
And
so you must have done some gunnery with that airplane.
I did some gunnery
and
with it.
Did it have 50 calibers or 20 millimeters?
It had 50 calibers and 20 millimeters, and fired both of them.
Did you fire them at the same time?
Well, no. If you had 20 millimeters in, it didn't have the 50s,
right, okay.
And vice versa.
So did it have 6 or did it have 8?
As I recall, it had 6 and 2 20s. Pardon me, 2 20s in each wing.
So when you now if you're doing a strafe pass, you're at about 10 or 15 degrees. When you fired all the guns at once, someone told me you would lose about 20 knots. The thing would slow down.
You could feel it. You could feel it slow down.
Wow.
Absolutely, that is a straight fact. And the plane just put a shock absorber on it, is what you did.
Did you do dive bomb in that airplane too?
Yes.
And how'd you do the dive bomb in that airplane?
Put the wheels down.
Whoa, get out.
The wheels served as dive brakes.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Same maneuver, same maneuver, come off to the right? Or,
yeah.
Yeah, kind of a wing over.
Well,
try to keep your
we
target.
didn't dive bomb as much in them, but that was an alternative thing.
Sure.
But generally speaking, when they went into Korea, which is what they did later, they were support for the Marines.
Right.
And because we had jets at the time, and these were ground support for the Marines. And I can remember one time coming back from an attempt, what should I say, a practice mission, and one of the guys said to the squadron commander, he said, well, we're going to have to see how many Marines you killed. And we said, what do you mean? We were machine gunning right where we were supposed to. He said, no, you were supposed to be behind this one and you were in front of it. And we didn't kill anybody.
Yeah, Jerry Coleman talked about it. He hated the Corsair. He really didn't like it at all. And the reason why, a couple of reasons, but he said it was really unstable. It was not as steady as an SBD.
Well, it wasn't quite as steady, but it was pretty darn steady. I mean, the SBD was like a rock.
Yeah. But then he also said one tried to kill him one time. He said his engine quit on takeoff in Korea. And then he jettisoned the bombs. And he thought one of the bombs hit the tail wheel and flipped it upside down. So he was upside down and backwards going down the the runway.
Wow.
And when he pulled him out, of course, he was a nervous wreck, and they put him right back on the airplane the next day. He said he got it so he was shaking so bad when he got the airplane they just sent him home.
What happened to me was after I was in New Orleans, and my job, they folded up the newspaper when towards the end of my career. And
somebody didn't sell enough papers, that's all.
that was it. Yeah. So I transferred back, I went back to Chicago and joined the Lord Baltimore Press, which was made folding boxes. And 2 weeks before I left, we had gone aboard a carrier and were qualified fully to be effective as ready to fly, and so then I transferred to Chicago and applied to Glenview to get back into the program, and they said they didn't have any openings at the moment. And I said, okay. Now Korea hit about 2 or 3 weeks later, and they called me up and said, we're ready for you now. And I remember saying, well, he's not here now, but when he comes in, I'll tell him that you called. And then I sat back and waited.
Yeah.
And because I had a wife and a child, and I was employed, and I came within a fraction of going.
Yeah.
Corsairs.
Flying Corsairs. And I love the Corsair. I don't know, something about that plane that just...
And the one we have in the museum we got from, was it in the lake? Where was it?
Oh, no.
Was it in the ocean?
No. It's history. I believe it was a Tunisian airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And
Tunisia.
Yeah, they flew it out of Tunisia for a long time. I mean, it probably went through several different...
Yeah.
And then it ended up in a collection.
Was it a 5? Did it have they had various developments in it, and finally they got a panoramic cockpit panel that went all the way, that came halfway around you.
It's a later model, I know that.
It was maybe a 5 model, probably.
I don't know, but I know the one thing is, maybe you can answer this. The early models had I guess a tendency to get into spins at low altitude.
Yes.
And so they did something to one of the wings.
Put a spoiler on it.
Which wing was it?
I can't tell
We can't. CO and I were looking for it. We were trying to find out where the spoiler was, and we looked all over, and we couldn't identify anything.
It was as I remember, it was a V-shaped thing that was on one wing.
Which way did the prop spin? Would it go clockwise or counterclockwise?
I think it was clockwise. It was on the right wing,
so
but
you're getting
I wouldn't bet my life on it.
Well, we couldn't find
wing.
Was it in towards the back of the wing, in the front of the wing, or the middle of the wing?
I'm thinking it was inboard more.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
How big? we're gonna look on Wednesday.
Yeah, we're gonna look.
It was, maybe this wide or something, and I do remember. I'll try to answer your question. I'd say something approaching 280.
Wow, yeah, that's what I've heard too. Yeah.
Now, when we got the SB2Cs, we started flying them and they just brought them in and landed them, and then we got in and started flying them. And then later on, a week or two later, representatives came down and started telling us about the characteristics of the SB2C, and one of the things that I remember was we should not dive it over 400 knots.
Ooh.
Or maybe it was 370, 380, something in there. And we all said, well, we've been diving them at 30 and 40 and 50 knots over your maximum speed. we just did it and got away with it.
Well, the first, I mean, I remember when I was, graduate policy with F4s, and then went out to the gunnery range and flew 45-degree dive, and I'm in the back seat going, Jesus Christ, this is scary.
Yeah.
And that, the job of the backseater in that point was just to call off altitude. So
Yeah.
It was like,
Sure.
and it's 12, 11, 10, 9, ready, pull. It was that fast,
Really?
And,
Oh, yeah, it was fast.
That's what the guy used to, my Pat Carroll used to say, pull out, pull out. Well, it was, 2,000, 1,500, 1,000, pull out. And then it got more panicky. Pull out, pull out. Because we'd get down there, well, you would get target fixation. Have you ever heard of that, maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Where you would see it and you'd say, well, if I could just go another, whatever distance was, I could get this thing perfect. And
See, the trouble is that
we lost
when you're
some
looking
pilots that
when you're
way.
looking at the gun sight, there's a thing called a pipper, right?
Right.
Because you're actually traversing across the ground this way in the dive. You're not going. I guess you could go straight down, but it's almost
No, you
impossible.
can't. You're going this way.
Because
you
you're
got-
getting a lift in the dive.
You got lift in the airplane.
Yeah, right.
And so the pipper kind of is going across the ground.
Yeah.
And so if this is your target here, you kind of watch the pipper till you get to that point. The trouble is if you're shallow, if you're supposed to be at 60 degrees and you're only at 55, you're shallow, and the pipper hits, you're going to be short.
Right.
And if you're too fast, it's going to go long.
Right.
So that's why you have to.
So once you got away from airplanes, did you ever fly again?
No.
So you didn't buy a private airplane, a
never.
Piper or a
No,
Cessna or Beech?
Well, they were expensive, but I sort of adopted the attitude that I got out of this alive. And I shouldn't tempt fate anymore because I did enough dumb things when I was young that I almost got killed, that if I start doing it again, I'm going to just repeat one of those things and kill myself. And
So
I had a family
Sure, that's interesting.
So one of the questions, you're 90 something, right?
93, almost 94.
Okay. So one of the questions I always have is why, how people get to be that old. And what I found was that most guys that were your age either never smoked or didn't smoke very much.
I smoked very little, and then when I was about 35 to 40, I said, why don't I quit once, because I keep saying I don't smoke. I smoke half a pack a day maybe or something like that.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll just see if I can quit. And I stopped, and I never looked back.
Yeah, that's
And I drink moderately.
Yeah, where did you finally end up? I mean, obviously you were very successful in your business.
Well, I was a salesperson and left the company. Well, the company was absorbed by International Paper, and I didn't like what was going on. So I went out and had a couple jobs, and finally ended up working for Potlatch Corporation. They had several plants that they had absorbed because the plants bought paperboard from them and couldn't afford it, and they ended up owning the paperboard converting plants. So we went to work for one converting plant, and it was in terrible shape and losing money like mad. Anyway, we turned it around and made it profitable. And then the Potlatch decided to get out of the business, and we bought the company. And we're successful and sold it.
Good. Let's talk about aviation. I always ask one question that I forgot to ask right at the beginning.
I'm beginning to run out of time, though.
Okay.
But I'm not pushing you real fast much, but we've been at this for an hour and a half now.
What's about all you know? One thing I forgot. What did your parents do?
My parents was an advertising executive and flew in World War I.
Really?
I have his logbook here.
What did he fly?
Here,
let me take a look. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we take some pictures?
You're taking pictures constantly.
No, I mean, I have another little camera here.
To Jenny. Was he flying to Jenny?
Yeah, flew I think he flew Jenny.
They had one, maybe?
They had wooden props in those days.
Sure, yeah.
Wow.
By the time the war was over, I flew everything that the Navy had at one time or another.
Yeah.
PBYs, JM, which was the B-26.
Yep.
The float planes. I don't know. I guess it's sort of like if you fly one of them, you can fly them all. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not much.
Yeah.
Wow.
What pictures do you want to take?
Wow, this is really cool. Ream Field, he was here in San Diego. He was at Ream Field.
Uh-huh.
Aerial gunnery school. Boy, wasn't it cool how people had such good writing those years? So I guess he didn't get in combat either, did he?
No, he didn't.
Boy, you guys were lucky.
We were very fortunate.
And it's probably a good field, or probably a good, well, we flew at Rockwell Field.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. January 4th, 1919.
But my son never flew an airplane.
I was going to ask you. Yeah, I met your son. I played golf with your son.
Question.
Sure.
What was your favorite aviation story you'd love to tell?
Oh my gracious.
You must have one. Come on, it's late at night at the bar and everybody's bragging.
Well, it's difficult for me to, there were so many little ones that chances that I took. I mean, like, I can remember one guy who jumped out of an SB2C and opened his parachute, and he was drifting down, and I flew around it because we were in Hawaii, and it was over Molokai, I think, and so I circled around him and to be able to tell where he landed in case anything went wrong. And later he told me, he said, "Well, thanks a lot for circling around me." And I said, "Well, I was just trying to get," he said, "You collapsed my chute at least once." I said, "Oh, Jesus."
His backseater must have jumped out too then, I guess.
I beg pardon?
I guess his backseater must have jumped out too.
Yeah, well, no, he didn't have a guy in the back seat at that time. But, you know, there were other stories of things that happened. That was one of them I can remember, and the one of going down, of having the dive brakes on and closing and almost not pulling out of the spin. That was another one.
I heard stories where some of the later in the war when it really got hot, you know, they didn't, you know, like Guadalcanal, the SBDs were dive bombing. They said, "Heck, I'm not flaps out. I'm just get in and get out and drop your bomb and go."
Yes.
So, wow. Well, anyway, let's turn this thing off.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. That was great.